Bula Vinaka, everybody. This is Dave at Vinaka Urban Farm. This is day 2 of my Kickstarter, and as part of my Kickstarter campaign, I am going to make a series of videos about life on the farm and some techniques and skills that I have learned over the course of my experience as a gardener and especially as a farmer in the past year that might be useful to home gardeners who are interested in learning how to do things themselves. So if you're interested in my Kickstarter campaign and contributing to it, basically the idea is I'm going to be turning some other people's yards into their unused lawns into urban farms and selling the produce around Columbus. If that's interesting to you, you can click on the link in the description for this video and go check out the Kickstarter. And I would love you to do that. There's some rewards on there that I'm pretty excited about, so go check it out if you want to. And if you're interested in learning about how I plant lettuce or how you might be able to plant lettuce, stay tuned, and this video is going to be great for you. So without further ado, let's get into it. Alright, so here we are at the other half of my greenhouse, and I've got the materials set up that we're going to use to start lettuce from seed, and I'm going to show it to you right now. You have a couple of different options, and I'll identify those as we go along. So one thing you'll need is a tray, a seed starter tray. This one is a narrow tray. It's kind of thin. You can see it's like 1 inch or 1.25 inches thick. The most commonly available trays, however, are a bit thicker. This thick, maybe a couple inches, but twice as thick. I prefer the narrow trays for a variety of reasons, but if you're a home gardener, those thick trays will work just fine. For most of you, a good option will be to use these little cell trays. Like you can see this little tray, it has a bunch of different cells. This one has 128. You can get a lot of different options. For lettuce, any size is going to work, but I would say the smaller the better because they're going to be little tiny seedlings. They don't grow very fast, and by the time you transplant them, they won't be that big. So you'll get more bang for your buck if you use small cells. The basic idea is that these cell trays rest inside of the bigger trays, right? And you can find those at your local department store. And the reason is that it's really nice when these are seedlings to just lift this up and water underneath. If you get cold water on little baby seedlings, they can get a little disease called damping off that is disastrous. So it's better to water from the bottom. Another thing that you'll need here is a humidity dome or any kind of cover to keep humidity in and keep the seeds moist before they sprout is a good idea. Can be a clear dome like this, or you can even put another of these trays on top of it. Really anything, or some saran wrap. I used to do that too. You can just use what you have. It's not a big deal as long as you check on it pretty frequently. One other thing you'll need for sure is some kind of mix, potting mix or seed starting mix. I use this Pro Mix. I love it. I have done a number of side-by-side experiments, and this is what I always use for my seed starting. It has, it's not only a really good medium, it's mostly peat based, but it's seen whatever combination of fertilizers and stuff they have in there really works well for me. So that's what I use, but you can easily use, they make seed starting mixes that are like very fine, and they'll just say seed starting mix. They don't have any fertilizer in them. Those work just fine too. I've used those before. You're also going to need seed. I'm planting a few different kinds of lettuce, so I have all my seeds set out here. I'll talk about those later. And the technique I'm going to be showing you today uses, instead of these cell trays, I'm going to use a soil blocker. That's what I use. I prefer it, and I'll explain it in a bit, but basically this little grid, I stamp dirt or potting soil into it, and then I will put the potting soil on that tray and stamp it out just like that, right? Actually, I'm going to stamp it out onto a little mesh insert that I'll show you in a minute to allow me to do exactly the same kind of bottom watering that I talked about before. So I'll go grab that mesh tray and we'll start the process of preparing the soil and putting it into soil blocks. All right, so I have set up my little soil mixing station. You really don't need one of these, but I'll explain why I'm going to use it. Since I'm using that Pro Mix that I mentioned, it is not a quote-unquote seed starting mixture, and one of the differences is that it's a little bit more coarse. For seed starting, you generally want your soil to be pretty fine grained, so that it'll make really good contact with the seeds, and that'll make them sprout more readily. So the first thing I'm going to do when I use Pro Mix is I'm going to mix it up, and I'm going to add water to it so it's the right consistency, and then I'm going to put it through a little bit of a screen to just screen out all the biggest chunks. And that's not absolutely necessary. It's just something since I do this for a living and I want to do it to the highest quality that I absolutely can, that's just a step that I take. So I will show it to you. And it also really helps, not just with that seed to soil contact issue, but it helps with the soil blocker. It helps to use it more consistently and for it to pick up the soil and put it in more uniform quantities. So that's why I'm going to start with this step. I have found that the right amount of soil for the amount of soil blocks that I put in one tray is about 4 of the trusty, very official yogurt container, quart-sized yogurt container of soil. So I'm going to put 4 of those out there. 3 and 4. Then I'm just going to add some water to it. Now, I don't measure the water like I do the soil, but what I do is I just pay attention to the consistency. So I'll mix this all up, and this kind of soil here, this Pro Mix, and most potting soils you get will be kind of dry. Seed starter soil will be dry too in the bag, so you need it to be moist because seeds need moisture in order to sprout. But you don't want it to be sopping wet because plants can also drown. And that might sound confusing and vague and stuff, and for some things with gardening and farming, really it's just a matter of you have to try it a little bit and kill some plants and kill some seeds and be sad and shed some tears over it and just get your experience until you get good at it. So this is very close to the right consistency, and if I were using those cell trays, if I can show you here, it's crumbly, the soil sticks together, but when I squeeze it, just a little bit of water comes out. That's perfect, right? If I was using cell trays like most of you probably would, home gardeners, I would stick with this amount of water. But since I'm using this soil blocker, I'm going to add a little bit more water because it needs to be a little bit muddy to work with the soil blocker. That's just a difference between the soil blocker and the cell trays. So I'll just add a little bit more water, and then I'll run it through a filter, or excuse me, a screen, and we'll get soil blocking. Alright, it's good and mixed up. When I squeeze it, I'm not squeezing very hard, some water's coming out. It's a little bit muddy, that's a really good consistency. So that's the mixing and consistency part right there. Now let's put it through a screen and I'll show you what that's all about.